right, welcome everyone, and feel free to come on up. We don't bite. We're actually a very nice group of people, highly educated group of people, actually. Quantum computing is poised to revolutionize entire industries, and the region, the Pacific Northwest region, needs to be a leader. And so whether you're deeply technical or just curious, or we'll be asking you to work on regulations at the legislative level, this session will explore how we can harness this momentum to create high quality jobs and to become a global leader in quantum innovation. And so you are going to be hearing from the top experts and policymakers as they share insights on what it will take to establish the region as a premier quantum hub. And so the big question, of course, is how can a region attract cutting-edge job growth and lead the way in breakthrough technologies? And what is the future of computing? And so I am joined here by experts. And so the panelists are John Campbell, IonQ, Senior Director of Architecture; Allison Berg, Photonic Inc., Chief Marketing Officer; Charles Marcus, Professor of Physics, Boeing Johnson Endowed Chair; Nardo Manalotto, Qubits Ventures and our caucus chair, we just formed the caucus right here, Managing Partner; and Jason Yeager, Montana Photonics and Quantum Alliance Executive Director. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And I am Cindy Ryu, Washington State Legislature and Madam President Emeritus as of 2 hours ago. So we'll start from the big picture of, let's see, did we want to do, as you are doing your intros, if you would answer the big question of how can a Pacific Northwest region attract cutting-edge job growth and lead the way in breakthrough technologies? And so if we could go down the line, should we do that? And then just give us your prepared remarks as well as answer that big question, please. Would you like to go ahead and get started?
All right, well, thank you, Cindy. So I'll start with the intro. Jason Yeager, I have the privilege of serving as the Executive Director of the Montana Photonics and Quantum Alliance, an industry association located in Bozeman, Montana. I'm just curious, by a show of hands, how many are familiar with the photonics and quantum community in Montana?
Oh, good.
Okay,
good.
1, 2, 3.5.
3.5.
Okay, so I've got some work to do here. Montana's well known for mountains and rivers, the show Yellowstone, but what it isn't well known for is its advanced manufacturing ecosystem. So in our industry alliance, we have over 70 members employing directly about 1,500 Montanans and indirectly through the supply chain over 10,000 Montanans focused on advanced manufacturing for photonics and quantum. Just adding up the market cap present in Gallatin Valley, whose IP came from the University of Montana and R1 Institute, we have over $200 billion of market cap present in that ecosystem. And photonics is an enabling technology, and some people here, everyone on the panel knows how photonics and quantum are related. And I think Charlie's going to tell us in more detail, but they're fundamentally entangled technologies. Our ecosystem has present we got our starts in photonic materials back in the 1980s. So we've been at this a long time, and we're gaining momentum as we go. And so first, I'm really excited to be here today because by the show of hands, you're not familiar with what's happening. And here in the Pacific Northwest, to answer the big question, how do we do this? One, we have to know what we're good at, what resources we have in the community, what's working well, and where are there opportunities for us to come together and collaborate. So thank you for the invite to be here today to talk. I'm excited about that. I also have the privilege of serving as the vice chair of the Headwaters Tech Hub, one of the 12 funded tech hubs through the EDA Chips and Science Act program. I know there was a funded tech hub in Washington State. Fingers crossed it will be again. Hopefully good news. We'll see here in a few weeks. I also serve on the governor's State Workforce Innovation Board, advising the governor on current and future workforce needs. Why is this important? Why are we here today? The answer is I think we really need to discuss what we can do together. And I'm looking to hear more about from the rest of the panelists where those opportunities are, and from you as well.
I think this is on. My name is Charles Marcus. I'm a professor at the University of Washington. And I have, coming up in the next round, I have the privilege of introducing the topic of what is quantum technology. And you know, for those of you who loved your high school physics class and thought maybe this is the profession for you, I'll try to explain what that is. Because even when we start using words like photonics, the company is called photonics, you might be asking yourself, or thinking back to the class you took, what's a photon again? And like if I have a flashlight and I shine a flashlight, are those photons or are those not photons? It's a very complicated problem, and as an academic, I have a particular role, I think, among these people, which is, these days it's called workforce development. It used to be called education, but the input to these companies, whether they're Microsoft or Amazon or the smaller companies, IonQ's not so small anymore, is the output of my life and the life of University of Washington. And I think what I'd like to represent as this conversation goes on is the critical role of education, we can call it workforce development, and universities in inventing the future. I can tell you that within my own realm of university researchers, the conversation evolved from 10 years ago, in which we asked ourselves, is this quantum stuff going to ever add up to anything? Should we invest our research lives, our students' futures, our time into this? Or is it like many other bubbles, either academic or business, where the bubble will burst? I think that that conversation has changed, at least within the universities, to, is there any way we at the universities can possibly keep up with IonQ, Google, the photonic companies, or is it game over and we should go back to basic research because the big players with their big budgets have scooped in and taken all of the prize? I think the important message that I have to deliver is that I'm absolutely certain, as are my colleagues, that the answer to that question is no. That there is a partnership, because the future has not been invented yet. What has been invented is a glimmer into a new technology that will indeed revolutionize how we process information, how we communicate, how we compute, how we measure. But big companies have their own problems. Big companies can get stuck on a track and they have to do it a certain way over and over and over again. Universities have agility and they can pivot, try something new. And it will take a lot of trying something new. So as I pass the microphone down, I think that I want to represent one particular idea. And I'm speaking as somebody who worked at Microsoft for 5 years. I have a lot of industrial experience. I was funded by them for over a decade. I want to speak about the key role of universities. It is not lost on any of us in the room that Stanford happens to be in the middle of Silicon Valley, or MIT happens to be in the middle of Kendall Square, and that University of Chicago happens to be in the middle of the Chicago Quantum Exchange. The University of Colorado happens to be in the middle of the Elevate program. And so what we invent as friends, colleagues, former coworkers, has to involve the handoff from education to workforce. And I think it's critically important that we get that link right, even if we've got our eyes on the bottom line. Even if this is, at the end of the day, about economic strength we can't forget the key role of education in participating in that. And history has shown that it's critically important.
Hi, y'all. I'm Nardoman Loto, managing partner for Qubits Ventures. It's a VC firm. I invest in the future of computing, data, intelligence, and infrastructure. A mouthful, right? And the reason I want to give you this bigger picture, right? So this investment is investing in early stage companies. So anything that's just coming out of the university all the way to their growth, right? Up to a certain stage, Series A. I do invest globally because I feel like talent is global, and there's a lot of interesting stuff happening globally. If you feel there's no competition, there's a lot of competition globally. So that's one thing. The question regarding how can Washington and this region compete, one area would be to look at what you have, right? So what Jason said, if you don't even know what you have here and your capabilities here, where do you target, right? Because for example, if your strength is in one particular area, my observation is the strength seems to be in software and AI, right? But it doesn't seem like maybe there's a very limited strength on the hardware side. So from a strategic standpoint, where do you go? Do you go hardware, where you can create workforce there, or do you go all software in the next generation of software? The other piece is look at this from a big picture standpoint. A quantum is just one compute architecture, right? So look, everything that you're doing for other compute architectures, let me name a few of them. Thermodynamic computing, reversible computing, photonic computing, right? Multi-dimensional computing. These are all computing architectures that I'm looking at, and they're here, right? I think the question is, where do you want to play? Do you want to play only on the quantum level, or do you want to play on the bigger level? So that's one. And then the other piece is, if you know your capabilities and what you're good at, and you figured out where you want to target, do you have the ecosystem to actually build here? So one things that I've done is actually partnered with a venture studio organization here in Seattle called Barklow Venture Studio. And what they do is they help professors and researchers get from early stage to a commercialized state. And I am their fund partner. So there's a representative here, Shara. You guys may want to chat with her, especially for folks in the university side of things. That would be another infrastructure that needs to be built here as well. And then the other part is, don't look at this as, if you close your ecosystem, you'll never go anywhere. But if you open up your ecosystem, you'll go much farther. So this has to be done together because this is very hard stuff. You can only compete in certain spaces, and you need the rest to basically make that happen for you.
Thanks, and thanks for the invitation. So my name is John Gamble. I am currently Senior Director of Architecture at IonQ, and so I want to introduce IonQ first and then me. So IonQ is a company that is headquartered in, actually the other Washington, so it's headquartered in College Park, Maryland, but it has a big presence here as well. And IonQ, we work on both quantum networking, which has to do with those photons, which we'll learn about later, as well as quantum computing. And in particular, we build ion trap-based quantum computers. That's where the ion comes from in IonQ. On the business side, we're the largest public pure play quantum computing company. So we have quite a few employees now working both nationally and internationally, trying to build the best quantum computers in order to solve the world's most complex problems. My journey started as doing my PhD in quantum computing and then moving into the national lab space and then into industry. Microsoft is actually what brought me up here working on their quantum program. And as I reflected back on the big question, I was thinking about it on my drive-in in terms of like what we need to do here in order to compete with all of the other economies that we see kind of emerging both nationally and internationally. And, when I think back to when I was in grad school studying this stuff, and I had no earthly idea that there would be an industry, however many years later. I thought it was still kind of far off in the future. And I remember I was actually at a summer school in the Pacific Northwest, it was at UBC, and we toured D-Wave, which at that time was very new, like brand new company. It was the first one, yeah. It was really eye-opening to see kind of what this could look like, albeit at an early industrial player, but in industry. Back then and still now, we're thinking a lot in terms of the scientific questions, like the fundamental questions that we have to answer in order to make this stuff work, as well as what would it be good for, how will it drive economic growth, and so forth. But also, and I think even more importantly now, is the question of talent density. And I think that that's the way that we win here. And so I want to echo kind of what Charlie said in that it's about getting the relationship right between the universities, not just in Seattle, but also in the broader region, with the companies, having that balanced correctly, so that we can actually advance more quickly than other centers as they come up. And I think about it, I hire a lot of people in my role into kind of an industrial player in this. And we haven't gotten that relationship quite right yet. And I think exploring that and what that could be and being courageous in terms of not just doing the same thing, not just like making that look the same as it has in the past and it does now, but trying new models, experimenting with different models that might be unconventional and might make some academic administrators and company executives uncomfortable, is kind of the way that we're going to disrupt and innovate here.
My name is Allison Berg. I came down from the wilds of Vancouver, BC. I'm with a quantum computing startup. I guess in the most technical sense, we're competitors, but in the early stage of an industry, it behooves us all well if we all succeed. And while we have a different, probably underlying modality than IonQ, there's room at this stage for a bunch of approaches. I have a polar opposite background to everybody here. I am not a physicist, so if you are a physicist, you can launch the questions at them. To the disappointment of my parents, I am an English literature major with a Middle Eastern history minor. Our company started really aggressively ramping in 2021. There was 3 of us. Early seed funding, over the last 3 to 4 years, we've secured $140 million in funding, including backing from Microsoft and some Canadian partners as well. We were one of the 3 Canadian companies selected for the US DARPA initiative. And my early role was responsible for talent acquisition. And we are probably at the stage right now where for every person with quantum talent, there's 5 vacancies worldwide. So we're going to need to look at what that looks like. How do we create more partnerships with the universities? I personally think for quantum, right now the language is still reserved for insiders. When we're talking about photons and qubit approaches and modalities, that still is the language of insiders. It's almost like where the Human Genome Project was in the 90s or the early 2000s, where nobody knew what we were talking about. And then suddenly today, though, we talk about DNA and sequencing and biomarkers. How do we make quantum more accessible? And that's probably still a couple years away until we actually start seeing the use cases. I hope we get to the stage where the underlying modality is not that relevant. Of course, all of our modalities are competing to get to scale. Who's going to be able to deliver the thousands of qubits you need to work together to actually unlock the use cases? And that's where quantum gets more interesting. So I think I come at it from a slightly different bent, is how do we create a common language so it's not so exclusive? I have to say, I've been to a lot of conferences and it's so deep technically, and that's that natural stage of the industry, but I think we're within 3 to 5 years of seeing the language change so the broader community can understand what quantum's going to bring.
Excellent. Thank you.
And by the way, it's never fun to be the 5th speaker on the same question.
but you did quite well. And along that line, so glad to have an English major up here with all the physicists. Thank you so very much. And we do have Lieutenant Governor Denny Heck joining us, because I think that's going to be your focus the next few years, in addition to, of course, making sure that our trade with Canada stays super good terms. And Dr. Williams, who had been talking to me about, we have to have a quantum strategy. I extracted a promise out of the governor's office that Washington State, we must do that. So thank you so very much. And Dr. Williams is our state broadband officer at this time at a very critical juncture. So because of what you all told us we need to do, because when we talk about AI, especially at the legislative level, we all automatically think it's Chat GPT, and there's way more to AI than Chat GPT. And so because of that, we're going to ask for a 2-minute explanation from Dr. Marcus about what is quantum computing, and that in terms that everyone can understand in this room and beyond. Dr. Marcus.
I'm delighted to do this. 2 minutes. It's 100 years that the theory of everything we see around us, from stars to the sodas in our cups, was understood and written down. It may be the most significant historical event of the 20th century. We finally understood the nature of all of nature. That's the good news. There are 2 pieces of bad news. The first is the equations are in our hands. We have them. There has never, ever, ever been an experiment that disagrees with those equations. Ever. We have the theory of all of nature. That's amazing. But there are 2 problems. The first is you can write down the equations very easily, except they're very hard to solve them. They're easy, for instance, with the hydrogen atom. 1 nucleus, 1 electron. Boy, we know everything about the hydrogen atom because it's so simple. But when you even put a couple of them together to try to make a molecule, or to try to make, let's say, a larger molecule, think of the last time you had a Campari with soda, that red liqueur. There's a molecule in there that makes it red. If I handed that molecule to any one of these practitioners here, and I said, what color is that molecule? And we know it's red. There is not a computer on earth that could tell you the answer to that. Even though we have all the equations, we know exactly what is going on in that molecule. Someone says, what color is it? Answer, I don't know. So that's the first piece of bad news. The second piece of bad news is a little secret that I want to let you in on that has been for physicists job security for 100 years. And that is that we learned a long time ago that we nor anybody else understands quantum mechanics. We simply don't. We wrote down the equations. You've probably heard the name Schrödinger, the Schrödinger equation. You know, a few years after Schrödinger wrote down that equation, he said, if I would have known the mess that we got into, I would have never gone into this field. The fact is that even the early practitioners didn't understand what they'd written down, and nothing has changed in 100 years. So the second piece of bad news is we have the equations that describe all of nature. The first problem is they're hard to solve. The second problem is we don't understand them. We as physicists have let go of that second problem. What does it mean? 40 years ago, somebody asked the question, well, this is interesting and mysterious and it's hard to understand. Can we do something with the subtle aspects of quantum mechanics that can't be done in any other way? Those beginning names, you probably know the name Richard Feynman. You probably don't know the name David Deutsch. There were early practitioners who said, can we put this idea to work in a new way? And only in the 1990s did the answer emerge, yes, we can solve problems and communicate more efficiently and make measurements more accurately and build faster computers if we take advantage of some of these subtle laws that are both difficult to solve, hard to build, and nobody understands them. And yet they give the right answer. So if there's anything I want you to take away from the introduction to quantum mechanics is, don't say anymore, oh, that's very complicated, I don't understand it. Because nobody understands it. Nobody understands it. You say, join the club. Nobody understands it. But we know how to use the equations. And the equations say, when we build this machine, it's going to go a lot faster than the ones we have now. And that's what we're trying to do.
All right, thank you. We'll have a test in 60 minutes. So just to go from that down into the real, right? And we'll start with Allison. The question is, would you please dive into the impacts of quantum? How will it affect all industries? And because quantum will move at a speed that people can't even imagine right now. Go.
Okay, I changed my mind. I want to go fifth. I'd love to chat with IonQ after about the use cases you've got in the field. McKinsey is estimating that there's going to be anywhere from $2 to $10 trillion economic impact that quantum's going to bring. It's materials science, it's chemistry, drug design, climate modeling, logistics. And you're seeing D-Wave actually unroll like logistics and manufacturing solutions right now. And we're talking a lot about talent and development, but we're actually talking about the economic impact that quantum can bring to sectors. Like, even if you're purchasing quantum, you're using quantum. It also behooves nations to be looking at post-quantum cryptography. Quantum probably is going to crack almost all RSA encryption, so that's going to affect finance institutions, telecom. All forms of online transactions are going to need to be quantum secure. Now, and sometimes people put the big scare out with quantum. Arguably, quantum networks can, as we've talked about, can secure some of those quantum transactions. So it's arguably, quantum's probably going to be one of the most transformative technologies we're going to see in our generation.
Anyone else wants to take that question?
Sure. Yeah. So, it's a fascinating question, and of course, it's one that I've been thinking about like a lot. And I've come to So first of all, another secret, right, is again, no one actually knows. So we are in, like, if you think about it, like how this parallels kind of the conventional computer story. It's kind of common for people to say like, oh, it's back when people were developing like early integrated circuits or something like that. It's before that. It's kind of like you're trying to predict what computers are going to be able to do like pre-ENIAC, right? So pre kind of vacuum tube era, like getting into mechanical computers, like where people are arguing about like how we're actually going to stitch these things together, what is the logical instruction set, stuff like that. And if you think back what the projections were back then, it's like, what are these good for? Well, they're good for missile trajectories and I guess computing logarithms, right? And now, you have like this thing, right? No one would have thought of that. And I think we're kind of in a similar stage where we have, of course, the benefit of hindsight in classical computing. So we have a lot more kind of a broader view. But until we actually have the machines in place that the smart people all around the world can start actually innovating on these machines and start developing new techniques and new algorithms and new approaches, I expect that I will be surprised and delighted in terms of what people find and value. So while we have like a lot of estimates from people whose job it is to make such estimates, right, in terms of projections, cost projections, the error bars on that are like this. And I think that I expect to be surprised and delighted.
I'll weigh in a little bit. I get to see a lot of these creative things here. So the way I would look at it is you have an existing industry, you have existing applications that happens on the classical side of things, right? So one view is to look at our existing AI applications and see if there's anything we can improve there, right? So that's one view. The problem with that view, yes, it's a macro view. The problem with that view is it lacks the creativity of what kind of problems we can solve. So the first thing that you may want to think about is how can we, probably rise up and figure out how to solve bigger and bigger problems. That's one thing. Second, and let me give you an example, right? So I'll give you a use case that I've never seen before, but you know what? Might as well invest in it, right? So let me give you a portfolio company of mine. They came out of Stanford, and they've created this device that they call the quantum electrospectrometer. I said, what the heck is that, right? So I learned about it, they told me about it, and I said, well, what does it do? And what it does is it captures vibrational frequency data of cells and molecules. I've never heard of vibrational frequency data in my life, right? So now they're using this new data set that they've created, that they've captured, right, to as a new biomarker for drug discovery, for hyper-personalized medicine, and so on and so forth. That is a very creative solution. I'm seeing more of that kind of stuff. That's on the sensing side of things, right? So that, to me, is an elevated way of problem solving in a more creative way. So my challenge here is not necessarily, quantum will give you a lot of things, and so will other compute modalities. But the challenge is think about the problems that you want to solve if you have this potential exponential capability. That would be my suggestion. Be more in the problem-solving mode, because to me, when we solve hard problems, it becomes an investable kind of thing.
Go ahead, please.
Well, I'm going to change the topic a tiny bit for my answer, if I may, which is there's a lot of goodwill on this panel, and there's a lot of goodwill in this room. I think people would like this region to thrive, and they would like this to be a topic in which the Pacific Northwest is excellent, let's say. And I think that the hard problem, the hard nut that we're trying to crack is exactly how to set something up so that the barriers are low, the barriers between, people who are really already friends or new friends or something like that. So there's no competitive urges, there's no opposition. There's, of course, a finite amount of money in the world, so that if you spend it on this, you don't spend it on something else. But we have an organization. There's something called the Northwest Quantum Nexus. And it started off with just a few companies, but the new director of it, who is me, flattened the organization and said, the door's opened. Come in and join. If you're from a state that, is like arguably not the Pacific Northwest, or is, come on in, be with us. If you're from a company that maybe doesn't have your headquarters in the Pacific Northwest, come in, be with us. So there is this thing, and I have to acknowledge Joseph Williams, who has been, sort of the adult in the room. While I've been inviting everybody to join, he's been saying, well, maybe we have to be a little more sensible about this. And bringing some government expertise also to the Northwest Quantum Nexus. But what I would like to identify is that there is a venue for us all to play together, to talk, even to compete in a friendly way. if that's what it takes. But to do it in a way where there's a lot of communication. What this region has, I think, beyond the big companies, Microsoft and Amazon, and you all know the list, what this region has is ease of communication between people, I think. I've lived in many places, including in Silicon Valley. I both was a student and a professor at Stanford University. I know the Silicon Valley spirit, and I think that it's a very different spirit here. And it's something that's not just like what companies we have. It's what is the spirit of the place. And I think that we can double down on the spirit of the place and to say, we want an inclusive environment here, inclusive in all senses of the word, geographic, personal, every sense that that word means, and to create a community in which we're exchanging information. And I think that in a way, I'm going to propose something, which is that that is more important now than money.
Yeah.
At some point, we're going to need money, but first we need a community. And I think the Northwest Quantum Nexus has been a seedling for that, and that we should double down, grow it, and be inclusive.
Yeah, before Jason brings us back to the question on the table, as I was meeting with them a couple of times, I equated it to the cannabis industry in Washington State, which is about 10 years old. So anyway, so thank you for continuing to advocate for this ecosystem that we thrive in and actually are very interested in making sure everybody succeeds. Okay, Jason.
All right, well, Charlie did a great job with describing what is quantum, or quantum mechanics, and did a good foundation. I'm going to muddy the water just a little bit. So when we talked originally, we talked about quantum computing, and everyone here has heard about quantum computing, but how many have heard about quantum sensing? Nardo just talked about quantum sensing. There's 4 modalities, and I'll use some phrase catchwords, and if we do it enough times, they'll catch on, right, Allison? 4 modalities of quantum. There's quantum computing, which everyone sees in the newspaper. You hear about it, doomsday clock when they crack encryption, solving the world's problems. But there's also quantum communication, quantum networks. There's also quantum sensing, the biomedical application Nardo just talked about. And there's also quantum materials. And what do we have already here in the Pacific Northwest? Well, at Montana State University is one of 2 quantum foundries in the United States producing 2D quantum materials. This is like Pandora's box back in the semiconductor revolution, where you had new materials, silicon, you're developing finding new things. They're developing 2D materials which has unique properties, just like Charlie said. We can make it, we don't know why it works, but it works. So they're making high temperature superconductors out of 2D materials. But if you look at those 4 modalities, which one do we think is going to be present in application for us in the near future? Of those 4, quantum sensing is probably going to be the first one. There are companies in Europe already producing devices that you can buy off the shelf using this technology. So when we talked about quantum, yes, quantum computing is the gorilla in the room. There's a lot of excitement about that. But don't forget the other 3, because they're not only players at the table, they're probably going to be what you see first in your homes.
And that near future, how many people up here and there thinks is within the next 5 years for applications? 5 years?
For which?
For any kind of applications that are, that the consumers, okay? All right. How about in the audience, 5 years? Wow, okay. In the next 10 years? 10 years for sure? All right. Okay, good. It's within my lifetime. Thank you. So next question is for John. How did IonQ and Photonic choose the Pacific Northwest, and anyone else?
Sure. Yeah. So I think that we chose for a couple of reasons. So I actually remember when I was first having early conversations, like initially I said, no, I'm not going to move to Maryland. I'm very happy in the Pacific Northwest, thank you. And they said, oh, it's okay. We're opening an office in Seattle. And I said, great. But why we chose this region, twofold. So first, key talent. So we needed a talent pipeline, especially for software engineering, as well as for other types of kind of critical hardware engineering, which we're actually pretty rich in here. So for instance, Blue Origin is here, right? The Reality Labs is here. And so that type of like mechanical, optical, complex systems engineering, the region's quite good for. And then once you start saying, okay, software kind of constrains you to like West Coast, you look at California and think, just like for a small company that you know doesn't have the resources of like a huge mega company, right? The Valley and that area of California is so expensive compared to the Pacific Northwest region, and so that kind of drove us to Seattle as well. In addition, of course, there's like they're great university partners up here, right? In particular, UW, of course, as well as University of Oregon, and others like around the region as well. And there are you know, these organizations that are growing, like NQN that Charlie mentioned as well. So we basically decided that we were going to have our manufacturing center here. So we stood up, I think it officially opened in 2024. You know, I remember touring the building in 2023. A dedicated manufacturing facility in Bothell, so it's like 20 minutes north on 405 from here. That's where I go to work every day. And there we have our manufacturing line, which is, you know, making these machines, which we've already, like, we have done a build there and we have shipped it and installed it in Switzerland already. So it's happening, and it's just down the road.
Great. Our founder and chief quantum officer is Canadian, and then she did a lot of her, after her undergraduate work, she did a lot of her schooling at Oxford and in Australia, where there's a centralized expertise in silicon spin and quantum. But she came back to Canada and established the Silicon Quantum Technology Lab at SFU, which is a university in British Columbia, largely because of very creator-friendly intellectual property rights. So some of the universities try to keep a lot of the IP to themselves, but this was very favorable towards founders. And so that was one of the reasons, like, she came back to BC. And we're all in the Pacific Northwest right now. It's a pretty easy talent play. Like, Canada punches probably above its weight in terms of quantum. We've got about 30 quantum startups, next to only the US in terms of building quantum talent. Proportional to our population, we punch well above our weight. So the talent pool does exist in Canada, but quantum talent is a global play, and Canada's got fairly good immigration policies on high quality personnel to attract them, so we can fast track these people into the country, and very good relationships between the universities and the early stage companies. So internships, co-op programs. I think we've probably had less than 3% of foreign talent actually turn us down. I think Canada's a pretty desirable place to come to right now.
All right, thank you so much. And obviously, we are concerned about our immigration in USA policies, which is having people talk about the brain drain, but we don't want to go there, do we? All right, thank you. And be sure to put your questions in Whova, because if we have time, we'll do the running around with the microphone. Otherwise, I'm going to default to the app to ask your specific questions. So the next one is about funding. What is the role of federal funding versus private partner equity, especially with the reauthorization of the quantum bill in 2018 with $2.5 billion? There's a 2-year gap, I believe, in funding. And so the global investments, and then what are the time for comments from everyone, and then DARPA and DARPA QBI. All right, go ahead, Jason.
Well, this may be a bit of a round robin, We're at an inflection point here in the United States for funding for quantum. I had the opportunity of traveling in the UK and Germany here just a few weeks ago, and the UK announced $1 billion investment into quantum from the government. The US government in 2018 committed $10 billion in 4 phases. The first phase, 2018, for 5 years to 2023, we have the 2-year gap. Senator Steve Daines of Montana introduced into the Senate the Quantum Leadership Act for the continuation of $2.5 billion. We're still hopeful that would move forward, but I don't think we can afford to wait. So this is that inflection point. You're starting to see private-public partnerships establish themselves because nature abhors a vacuum. Charlie will agree with me. And if there's not going to be federal funding from the U.S. government doing this, and there is, don't get me wrong, there's still defense funding quantum. Industry and others are going to move in, and there's some really large examples that are happening right now. Illinois, I believe $800 million from the state of Illinois into quantum. The sovereign wealth of Qatar invested in a company in Colorado. $1 billion was announced just a few weeks ago. Texas and IonQ, if I have that right, and I'll defer to you of what you want to share about that. There's an opportunity here to bring a different funding source to the table. But that funding source is not government. They're not trying to do it just out of, we want to compete. They're looking for a return, and this is where I want to ask Nardo, how do you see that private-public partnership for funding working?
Yeah, so in very nascent spaces, this is really, really important, right? So from an investment standpoint, I'm not going to invest in a company that's just written on paper, here's my idea, right? So in the early stage, the purpose of a government funding type scenario is to de-risk the very early stage, right? From TRL 1 to, I'm more comfortable if they can get it to 5 and 6. So I'd like to look at companies at that stage. So the early stage, I'd like to, government to actually put the money in, right? So one of the things that I'm concerned about is the stuff that is being driven from a government funding standpoint are all these really great potential impact to defense, but also great potential to impact to industry and business and returns, right? But if you take a look at the entire quantum technology tech stack, there's a lot of stuff in there, right? If I look at this and say, okay, I can invest in IonQ, I can invest in photonic, those are a great investment. But in order for us to complete the supply chain, there's a lot of these components in between that makes all these things work. So who's going to invest in those, right? So let me give you an example. If somebody created a quantum coaxial cable, okay, that is a component, but is that $1 billion industry? Probably not, but that is a very key component in the supply chain, right? So we have many of that example. So don't look at the funding gap. The government is great at it, right, in doing this stuff. But we also have to figure out from a public and private standpoint, how do we address the funding gap for components that are critical to the supply chain that would make this technology work, right? So I think that there needs to be a little bit more thought into that. I haven't seen much thought into that. You've seen a lot of investors are looking at just the $1 billion shots, the moon shots, and things like that. But our investment is not going to be successful if we don't do those other pieces of it, right? Another good example is like, attenuators, things like that, right? So people would say, okay, well, who's going to invest in that? Somebody's doing, there's a company that came to me and said, oh, I have a better way of squeezing ions. I'm like, okay, that's a very small component of this compute. Who's going to invest in something like that, right? So the challenge is, to me, there is this gap, and we as a country, and maybe even Canada, will need to address that component of it. And unless that is addressed, it'll be hard to create a much better ecosystem for this.
Yeah, Canada historically has done a fantastic job in science and research, and we've often let the commercialization opportunity switch away, like fall away. To go to the US, I know we're here from a regional perspective. How do we change that? And that has to come from some government policy. And it can't just be funding. There's many ways government can support tech. And one thing that's really different here is, like you talked about software, this is deep tech. For investors and governments to expect a return in a year or two, this is deep tech. It means patience, it means playing the long game, and knowing that quantum is imperative to sovereign strategy. Just 3 weeks ago, the G7 nations all declared quantum a strategic imperative. So it behooves every nation to be doubling down on what quantum looks like. It can be early procurement. It can be becoming a journey customer to harden solutions as they prepare to go to market. Favorable trade and export programs to ensure that each nation's quantum imperatives are going to strategically survive.
Is it okay to pivot into QBI? Yes. Yeah. Okay. Because I think this is it's a great setup for it. So the QBI program, which stands for the Quantum Benchmarking Initiative, this is a program that's pushed by DARPA, which, for those of you who don't know, is like responsible for many of the like actual innovative technologies that we all enjoy today. They have a history of letting kind of scientifically minded program managers have like incredible discretion when compared to other US DoD initiatives in terms of who to fund, what to fund, how to structure programs, and so forth. And so the idea behind it is that companies, so quantum companies, who think that we have what it takes, both of our companies are in it, think we have what it takes in order to build what they're calling a utility scale quantum computer. So this is something that could solve useful problems within the next 10 years, whose value exceeds its cost. Show us what you got. And so basically in partnering with DARPA, we're able to fashion these plans and these engineering ideas out towards that kind of 10-year horizon in order to see what we think is possible. And I think what's so great about this program, and this is like, I think it's an example of the US, doing it right, is following on to what Narda was saying about the critical enabling technologies for quantum. This enables the US government to get out in front of it, because they will know in a way that protects and is sensitive to proprietary information. They will know, like all of the companies need this one component. We better be investing in that, for example. And so I think that it's really a good sign in terms of leadership for government funding to come. And I'm super excited about the program and where it's going. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, DARPA is a really interesting program. It's not picking the winner, but it's conducting the race. So they're getting an under-the-hood look at all of these different technologies to see who's going to probably go the distance. And it's actually been an amazing process, aside from the fact that we are a startup, so it takes a lot of resources to comply with DARPA, like when we're still in the business of building product, but as well as doing DARPA work. And incredible insights from the people doing diligence. And that's a really interesting thing for the space in itself, is how do you tried to explain what quantum computing is. How do you get an investor to invest in quantum if you can't diligence it? If any of you are investors in the room and you're going to go invest in a software company, intrinsically the value proposition is understood. When we've had the ability for people to do diligence on our company is like, it's probably one of 10 people in the world who can say, yes, you've got as good a chance as these 3 other modalities of hitting that scale. And DARPA is one of those things that's probably creating a level playing field. I guarantee you it has freaked out the other sovereign nations that the US is conducting this race and the other ones are not yet.
All right. Okay.
Let me say one comment about funding. It's true that there is an anxiety, which is maybe an understatement, concerning federal funding of science in the United States. And we've all heard the reports from the National Science Foundation. They are dire. They will be brain draining. I assure you that scientists will be fine. We'll just be somewhere else. So it is an issue, and I think we have to be proactive in preventing the undercutting of science in the United States. There's been a lot of talk about technology, but the technology that we're talking about, whether it's any one of these four pillars, is not very far away from scientific discovery. And so if you say, well, the National Science Foundation, that's funding, far-off ideas. These are far-off ideas. And you can read in a press announcement about Microsoft's recent Majorana chip having its origins from the National Science Foundation. So I would implore upon all of you to worry a lot. And let me be specific about the National Science Foundation. I have one other thing to add, which is even in a healthy funding environment, these agencies that sponsor research don't build buildings. And so the University of Washington and other universities have had to rely on philanthropy to build their newest buildings on campus. It's an unstable algorithm for being successful. And at University of Washington, there are absolutely fantastic buildings celebrating the business and science of the 20th century. But when you look at the material science development, when you look at the advanced technology, when you look at the physics departments and the material science departments and the departments which are about the future of technology, the buildings need replaced. The buildings are underfunded. And I don't have a clue about how to solve that problem. But I leave it to the smart people in this room to think of a solution to keep the facilities at the universities in our region A+. Because people will vote with their feet. Students will, faculty will, postdoctoral fellows will, and businesses will. And so we have to keep the facilities up. So 2 take-homes, National Science Foundation. How do we get buildings on campus?
Yep, investments in spite of all the challenges that we have, especially in Washington State. All right, so researchers obviously are very excited about this new technology, but businesses not as much. So how do we play both sides of the coin? Getting people excited about researchers, making sure that the basic research and the students and even the workforce is excited about it, but the businesses and quantum adjacent roles, they will open up, and hopefully in the US and in Canada, opening up opportunities for the workforce. Do you have a magic bullet for that? Narda?
So the magic bullet for opening up workforce is to build, right? So if you don't build, there's nowhere to work for, right? So that's one bullet. And I think the other part is there's a lot of enterprises right now of corporates. They're trying to figure out what the heck this thing is. There's a lot of opportunity even on the education aspect of it, because if you take a look at what they're predicting are the new job creation aspect of quantum and this kind of technology, there's a lot, but not all of them are physicists, right? So I think the part that needs to be understood is what is the impact of job creation in this kind of a technology. There's a report out there, I think it's like a QEDC report, the Quantum Economic Development Consortium report, that talks about all of the different types of jobs that could be created out of this stuff across all levels. It doesn't have to be just PhD, master students, master graduates, right? It could be undergrad, and it could even be trade school. Let me give you a very good example. So in Gallatin Valley in Montana, they have created a program for photonic technician. That is a very key workforce development program that says, okay, you know, I don't think I've seen a quantum computer that didn't have a photonic component, right? So who's going to take care of that? Right, so that is a very good program. The other program is, for example, we're going into the world of quantum cybersecurity. What the heck is that, right? Who's going to understand what the heck is PQC, QKD, QRNG, and all AEIOU, right? Whatever, right? So there's all these different things that are coming up that needs some level of support, some level of transition in an enterprise perspective. So my suggestion is download that QEDC report, take a look at all of the different types of job creation, and probably map it out in terms of where your university is at in producing that kind of a workforce.
So a bit of foreshadowing. We'll be releasing through the AFRL, Air Force Research Lab, a quantum economic assessment report. Hopefully that will go public in August, maybe September at the latest. It is a bit of the chicken and the egg. The program that Nardo referred to, the impetus for that, and I had the privilege of helping to write the curriculum and then partially teach at the community college. The impetus for that was industry needed this workforce. It could clearly articulate what the skill set was. We could design the program around it. And the amazing thing is it worked so well that they've had 100% placement of all graduates from Galton College, which is part of Montana State University, since inception in 2016. But it was industry designing curriculum for industry that fit the needs regionally. The challenge with quantum, and you'll see this in the report, is it isn't as clearly well defined. As we said, it's not unknowable, but it's not yet knowable. So the question is how do you define workforce or design workforce for 5-10 years from now without predicting what those skills will be? There is an answer. And it's, I guess the easiest way to tell it is the gold rush in '48, when people were rushing over to California. Okay, there were miners who struck it rich and became millionaires. There were some who made a living. There were some who lost their shirt. But there were others who did really, really well, and those were the ones in the supply chain. We still see Wells Fargo today. There's Levi's being worn here in the room. That came out of that gold rush, that supply chain. There's commonality in quantum in the supply chain. You mentioned one reason to come to the Seattle area was photonic, assembly, high tech. Perfect. Those are the areas that we can focus our workforce on so that as students come out, there's jobs today ready to go. And I do think Nardo's comment that the supply chain, I think that's going to have to be a crucial component as we see the dynamics globally right now, that we create resilience in that supply chain. But this is also not a problem that should even try to be solved just regionally. Each region should be entirely encapsulated in itself, self-sufficient, and have the supply chain. Figure out what you do really, really well and own that. And then collaborate with other regions so that you can create a more rapid advancement in the technology. So I guess that's my question to us here today. What is the Pacific Northwest really, really good at in quantum? What area can we own? And then where are the gaps? And yes, we could fill those, but we could also partner and find ways to do that together.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. We only have another 11 minutes left, so we're going to have. Did you put your question in here, please? Okay. So, yeah, I'm sorry, but I think they'll be available before lunch, so ask them personally if you would. And there was a question about total readiness level. So as you answer the last question, which is what is at risk if the US and Canada fall behind, and of course it's more than just quantum computing itself, and that's of course about China, and what are the key milestones in quantum and what is possible that you think we should all be working on other than copying from Montana, what they're doing right. And so would you like to, whomever wants to go first, you have 2 minutes
I
each.
started, so it's Allison's turn.
All right, Allison's turn.
Did I just get thrown under the bus?
Get to go to the front of the line.
That's right. I guess from the compute market perspective, I think we're seeing some pretty radical shifts right now. And I'm with you. It's probably like between 5 and 10 years before we see a lot of really interesting use cases. The last few years we've seen NISC, so early systems, early commercial companies coming up and running, and arguably not a lot of commercial value at it. Proving out some of the quantum mechanics, not a lot of commercial scale. We're seeing some amazing work right now in small scale logical qubit systems. Those are qubits that are error corrected, 10, 20, 30. Our company believes that the true value for commercial applications is anywhere from between 400 to 2,000 logical qubits networked together. Higher end apps like Shor's algorithm, probably 10,000 qubits. We're still 3 to 5 years within that window. When those milestones start being hit, you're going to see the hardware providers merging with the software people to say, what are the applications we unlock?
So I think that the risk, right, if we fall behind, is that things will snowball, right? So if we do not invest early now, we will not attract, the talent that will be building the first generation of like these utility scale systems, and because this technology, right, has this transformational potential, it'll be very hard to claw our way back from that. As far as what we can do now, I think that the curriculum comment I think really struck home with me, in that what I've seen so far, that all universities have kind of attempted this like a quantum kind of generalist master's level curriculum or something like that, and it's okay, it's a good start, but the problem with that, of course, is that it's such a broad, ambiguously defined space that it's kind of hard to get it right. And as a hiring manager, I'm looking at someone with this like superficial background in quantum, but I really need, a specific like vacuum engineer in order to get in and kind of own some subsystem. And so I think establishing quantum literacy across like core traditional engineering demands is like really important to do and to get right. And I think we can do that in the spirit of collaboration and openness in the Pacific Northwest. I think we can do that. It's going to take creative thinking in like deep internship models and things like that. And as I mentioned before, I think courage on the part of both the companies and the universities.
Over the past 5 years, we probably have about 48 different countries that provided their own federal funding in quantum. More recent update on funding, China put together $138 billion to invest in these emerging tech. That's a more recent announcement. Where are we? 10 billion, maybe? I think that's even stretching it, I think. So I think there's definitely, we're going to fall behind. The other geopolitical shift that's happening is these are critical technologies. We are being firewalled at this point, right? So the firewalling on the sovereign technology movement, what that means is they want to also create supply chains in these countries. So the competition is truly global. Okay, if the competition is truly global, then there's going to be a lot of competition for talent, a lot of competition for building supply chain, a lot of competition building capabilities everywhere. So if in a US position perspective, if others can do it, then what is our advantage? That's one, right? So we need to keep up with that. Sovereign tech is real. The more conversation I have with other countries, they definitely want data to be on their side. They want critical technologies to be on their side. They want supply chains being developed on their side. So that means we're going to be generating all these different types of companies that could be duplicative and so on and so forth, right? So that's the geopolitical aspect of it. The other competition is when you unlock compute and you pair it together with AI, which hopefully works really well, right? That's the hope. Then it opens up a next level of innovation. So who wants to be behind on the innovation race? I don't think the US can afford to do that. So I think what we need to look at is if we don't get there first, then we're under innovating and we're going to be defeated from that standpoint.
I think the most important points have been made. So I'll make a point which I want to emphasize is, even to me, not the most important point. The most important point was this idea that people will vote with their feet, and that if this is not a race where coming in second is a good idea. That's the most important point. But let me just comment on a regional competition as well. We see what's going on in Colorado, in New York. We saw what happened in the semiconductor industry in upstate New York, where they invested billions and it turned in to be an extremely good investment. We see what's happening in Silicon Valley. We see what's happening, Stanford and Berkeley. There is a regional competition, and the regional competition is both for workforce and also for intake of the best students. I'm tired of students getting admitted to Berkeley and University of Washington and having them pick Berkeley. I want them to pick University of Washington. I want to be better than Berkeley. And that's going to take some concentration. But the rewards are big, because in case it's not totally obvious, those of us who work at universities are in the position of managing young people. We are managers. We don't have the time, and we're too damn old to be the great innovators. The great innovators are in their 20s or maybe in their early 30s, probably not even in their early 30s. So our job is to bring those people into our environment and get out of their way. But the first step is the regional competition. And I'm, so glad we have Montana on our side now, because I don't want to compete with what you just heard from Montana. I want Montana to be part of our team. But I don't want people to go to Chicago because they have a $1 billion quantum program. I want them to pick this region. So let's make that happen. I don't know how to make it happen, but there is also a local ecosystem that we have to grow in competition with the nation.
All right, it's good to be last, right?
You get the last word.
I get the last words here. Risk. We're not going to keep up with other countries in the funding. We just don't have the political will at this time to compete. And I hate to say that, because that's historically not been the case for the United States. But with the National Quantum Initiative that funded to date $2.6 billion, and China at $138 billion.
That's the recent funding.
It's
That's
multiple
delta.
orders.
Delta.
It's an order of magnitude. So then the question I want to pivot is, so then what do we do? What do we do as a group? What can we do if we're not going to be able to say, we need an extra $100 billion or $250 billion in U.S. funding? There are a few things we can do, and you've already heard this as a theme throughout here. The first was when Charlie mentioned, we need tight working relationships between our academic and industry partners. This has to be regional, this has to be day-to-day, to be able that the students have a seamless transition between one and the other. We need a tight working relationship between industry and government. I heard this in the previous session where we were talking about space. And space is one of the key strengths that Montana has. We're hosting ESA and NASA for an international conference here in a few weeks. And they mentioned again and again, how do we get the attention of the federal delegates in Washington? How do we get the governor? And then they mentioned Colorado. And everything they said around Colorado is great. I may have said something similar. Wouldn't it be great that if we had a governor like Colorado that was explaining quantum computing with jelly beans? That was well done. I have no doubt we can try to get that done. But that being said, how do we get government engaged in this regionally? And I do think that has been one advantage Montana has. What's a small state? 1.3 million. Governor Greg Gianforte is going to lead a diplomatic mission to Asia here in October. One of the key technologies he's focusing on is quantum. Senator Steve Daines pushed the Quantum Leadership Act, co-authored that with Illinois. So we have the interest of government. And the last piece is academia and government working well. And that can be very challenging, but it needs to be done. Think of it as a triad. If all of these pieces are working together, then where they meet is socioeconomic growth. And then you're ready to bring in the additional funding to launch that. So the question to the group is, what can we do personally to help with those relationships between industry and academia and government and industry?
Excellent. Thank you so very much. Who in this room thinks we need to have further continuing conversations? Yep. All right. I think the next president of Penwar, absolutely, I'm going to make sure we continue this conversation. But for now, would you please give all the panelists a great big hand. Thank you so very much. I learned a lot today.